I want to share with you back when I was, I think, around 12 years old. I went on my first real vacation that we'd ever had. And we went to North Carolina and we came back up along the coast and stopped at Washington, D.C. And while we were there, the place that we went to that fascinated me the most was the Wax Museum. And I was amazed at the Wax Museum, and we got to see so many different scenes. And it was only a year or so after President Kennedy had been assassinated, and so they had a sculpture of President Kennedy. But that wasn't the one that impressed me the most. There was one of a ship. There was a ship during World War II, and on the ship were these four wax figures of four chaplains of different faiths. And the chaplains of the different faiths, as the ship was sinking, were handing their life preservers to men on the ship who had none. And it was a great image, and it's a true story, by the way. It actually happened. And I wasn't raised in the church, but I can remember thinking, wow, what would cause someone to do that? What would cause someone in the midst of the fear of dying, of drowning, to risk their own life, to give up the protection they had and give it to someone else, to sacrifice their life for another? That stuck with me till this day. I can still picture standing in front of that scene in the Wax Museum and seeing an amazing model of what it means to be willing to sacrifice ourselves for others. And so it's amazing then as we gather on this Good Friday that you who have been people of faith for years, or you who might be new tonight, or you may have come new to the faith like I did, we've had a model also. We've had a model throughout the history of Christianity of what it means to be willing to sacrifice, to give up even our life for someone else. Since that time, millions of people have come to understand their faith in Christianity, their faith that comes through belief in Jesus Christ. They've come to understand that, and they've given up different things, and they've changed their lives, and they've followed Jesus. And so every year, then, we come to this day that we call Good Friday. We come together and we look at the ultimate example of love. Jesus loved us enough to show us the way of life even unto death. But Good Friday is not only a reminder of the example of what Jesus has done for us, but I think for each of us, every year it should stand as a reminder, a remembrance, a call upon our lives to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, a reminder of who we are and whose we are. To whom do we belong? And Good Friday is an opportunity for all of us to look inside ourselves and to decide, are we following Jesus even unto the cross? We have to understand that first Good Friday was a pivotal day. It was an earth-shattering day in so many ways. The followers of Jesus had to, in that moment, abandon all hope they'd had till that point. Because their hope was not that somehow Jesus was going to die and be resurrected, something they couldn't even imagine. Oh no, their hope was that Jesus was going to drive the Romans out of Palestine, out of Israel, that Jesus was going to take control. Jesus was the Messiah and was going to take back the kingdom in earthly terms and restore us to power in earthly terms and have a victory in earthly terms. And in that moment on the cross, things changed for the followers of Jesus. No longer could they hope that Jesus was another David that was going to put together mighty armies and defeat their enemies. No longer could they hope that they were going to return to the paradise, to the Garden of Eden, to where everything was perfect once again. Once and for all, their paradise had been lost and a new age had begun, but they really didn't understand exactly what was happening. And I want us to pause tonight. I want us to pause because we, as modern-day Christians, have a tendency to rush right through Good Friday to get to Easter. We want to go past the cross. If we do, we only want to stop for a moment. We just stopped for a minute on our journey and then said, okay, let's rush to Easter now. That's the exciting time, isn't it? And if you think I'm wrong, how many of you think this is the same size crowd we'll have on Sunday morning for Easter service? There's been something about that we've either missed the point, we've lost the point, we've never been taught the point of how important Good Friday is in our faith journey. How important remembering and recalling what Jesus has done is for us. And don't be worried, we're not the first to miss it. I mean, Peter missed it, remember? First of all, when they came to get Jesus in the garden, what did Peter do? He wanted to get out and fight then, didn't he? He pulled his sword out. I mean, many of us are Peters, aren't we? That's what we would have done. And many of us would have continued like Peter did and denied Jesus the next day. It happens over and over. They didn't understand it. The other disciples went into hiding. They didn't understand it. Judas, who was sure that Jesus was going to restore his people to an earthly power, was so angry and frustrated that Jesus wouldn't do that, wouldn't go in that way, that he became a traitor. They never understood the ministry of Jesus in the deepest detail of its ministry and his ministry. They didn't understand when Jesus uttered on that cross, "It is finished," he really meant it. That all the way you've understood the world up until this moment is over. All the way you've tried to gain power, all the way you've tried to gain control, it's all over. It's finished. And Jesus wanted us to know that. We've continued to miss what Jesus was telling us. And the funny thing is that often it's we that are the insiders, the people of faith, that miss it the most. We miss the power of God, and sometimes the outsiders are the ones that see it the clearest and the best. It's that way throughout the Scriptures. Remember in the Old Testament, remember the story of Rahab? If not, no, we're not going into that tonight. You got to look that one up. Get your computer out tonight. When you get home, Google Rahab and look at the story of Rahab and how a person that was an outsider was the one that followed God's call upon their life. Remember Paul. I mean, Paul was not only not a Christian, not a disciple, not a follower of Jesus, but what? A persecutor of Christians. But what happened to him was he got the message. Somewhere along the line, he got the message that sometimes we miss. And sometimes I wonder when I hear the whole story of John read, I love to read all of the Scripture tonight from John 18 and 19, but I didn't do that tonight. But it tells a wonderful story. And the story of Pilate, it almost seems in the story that somehow Pilate may be getting an inkling to who Jesus really is. Pilate may see more than those that are ready to crucify him. I'm not sure. We don't know that. We don't know what happens with Pilate after that. But the truth is we must all come to grips with this idea of a cross and what it means for us on Good Friday. But not just on Good Friday, but every day. Theologians continue to argue and debate and try to figure it out, and they come up with theories about what the cross means. Because in so many ways, we still have this need to make sense out of something that seems so senseless. And so we try to make sense of it in terms of victory. We love victory, don't we? I mean, we even sing it. We don't sing it much here, but I remember when I had a country church, we sang Victory in Jesus once a month. Because we want to run to victory, but the cross is about the biggest loss of all time. So maybe Jesus was trying to show us something else but victory in earthly terms. I read an amazing book many years ago by theologian Paul Hessert, and it was called Christ and the End of Meaning. And Hessert talks in the book that the cross put an end to the way we'd made meaning up to that time in history. And sometimes we still go back and we want to recapture the old way, but Jesus has changed things. Hessert says this: the crucifixion means the Messiah is dead. There is no longer any hope of salvation in cultural terms like wisdom and power. What Hessert is saying is the hope of attaining salvation in traditional means of seizing earthly or political power or in fulfilling the law is gone. It's gone because we thought it was going to work out for us. Oh, the disciples thought that. Oh, we've got the right guy. We know he's the Messiah. He's going to change things, and boy, did he. But not in the way that they anticipated. And I really believe sometimes not in the way we anticipate. The inability to understand the call of Christ has led to not understanding that call at all. The call of Christ, even on our lives today, is not to have victory or power or wisdom in earthly terms. The call upon Christ upon our lives is the same as it's always been. It's to be willing to suffer and to sacrifice for others, to walk with them even unto the point of death. It's to pick up our crosses and follow Jesus. You see, that's what the call is. It doesn't promise victory. It promises us a life lived with Jesus in compassion and care for others. That's what we're called to do. That's how we're called to serve, to embrace others, to follow others. You know, so many times in my life I've heard this, and I know some of you have too. It's like somebody will be suffering from arthritis and they'll say, "Oh, it's my cross to bear." Or they'll have children that are out of control teenagers and they're running all over. "Oh, those children, that's my cross to bear." No, it's not. The cross we have to bear, the cross we are called to pick up, is the cross of Christ and our part of that cross. And to be willing to sacrifice, to be willing to suffer. Jesus doesn't give us a claim that we're going to have freedom from suffering, but calls us just the opposite, to share in the suffering of others. To share in a life that may cause pain for us at times, but follows faithfully Jesus towards the cross. I remember years ago reading a story from William Sloane Coffin. William Sloane Coffin was one of the great preachers of the last century, and he was a Presbyterian preacher, preached at Riverside Church in New York. And at one time when his son was 21, his son was killed in an automobile accident. And when it happened, it was a little snowy and icy, and he was driving along the bay, and he hit some ice, and he slid off into the water, and he couldn't get out of the car. And he drowned in the bay there in New York City. And many well-meaning people tried to talk to Coffin about that, and they said, "Oh, we think maybe this was the will of God." And he said, "No, it wasn't the will of God. It wasn't the will of God for my son to be driving a little too fast that night. It wasn't the will of God for my son to drink one or two more beers than he should have that night. None of those things were the will of God." You want to know where God was, Coffin said? Do you know where God was when this was happening? He said, when the waves closed over that car, God's was the first heart to break. Our God suffers with us because our God knows suffering. Our God has experienced suffering. And so our God didn't free William Sloane Coffin from the pain of the loss of a son, but God came, God cried with him, God walked with him, because God had already been on that journey with his own son. And so we're called to do likewise. We are crucified with Christ. Isn't that a wonderful saying? I remember my history professor in seminary saying, "Yes, we are crucified with Christ. The only difference is we keep trying to get down off the cross." And Good Friday is a reminder, a remembrance for us. We're called to be on the cross with Christ. We're called to be willing to suffer and to sacrifice all of who we are. I know it's difficult to give up visions of Easter. And I'm not saying Easter's not important, because it is. But let's not rush there too fast. Let's remember what Good Friday is about and who it is for. It's so difficult to give up that just wanting to go to the joy and the celebration. And yet today is a reminder that the cross is a model for our living and a model for our life. It's so important to remember that. I recalled a story when I was putting the message together this week. I didn't know if I was going to share it at first, but I do want to share it with you because I think it's an understanding of where God is in the midst of our struggles. For years and years, I've had a friend in the ministry. His name's John Randall. And John was in seminary at the same time I was in seminary at a different seminary. And I was serving a church in Chicago, and John was serving one in rural Clinton County, if I remember right. And on this particular time, it was a New Year's Eve, and John's oldest daughter had went away to be with friends. And John's 3 other children had a guest for the night, and they stayed up later than usual, and then they all went to bed upstairs, and John and his wife slept in the downstairs bedroom. And sometime in the middle of the night, John was awakened to heat and to flames as his house was on fire. He ran to go up the stairs to rescue the children, and he couldn't get up the stairs. And so John ran outside, and he could hear the children, and he was panicking, and he ran out to the garage, and he got a ladder, and he was barefoot in the snow and the ice and the cold, and he was trying to get a ladder to the window, but he couldn't. And all 4 children perished in that fire. Now, I don't want to say to you that John's faith made it all right all of a sudden. I do want to say to you that John never left the call of the ministry in his life. John never quit. John continued ahead in the shadow of the cross, knowing that his grief and pain were real and deep and aching, but also knowing that his God shared the pain with him. And that's what gave him the ability to go on. We too are called to share pain with those around us that are struggling and those that are hurting. And we're called to embrace them and to bring them into our lives. Henry Nouwen says we can only care for people to the level that we can make room for them in our lives. And so we are called for the to care for the hurting and the lost. And so I've heard for years, and I said this morning at the men's breakfast, that, it's really important. We can only understand Good Friday in the light of Easter. And I want to say to you tonight that Easter can only be understood in the light of Good Friday. When we focus on the lens of Good Friday and understand that that's when Jesus said, "It is finished." And that Easter is the bonus. Easter is the blessing. It's not the victory. No, it's what we get when we follow Jesus with faithfulness. When we pick up our cross and follow him, it's no longer paradise we get, but it's the gift of God with us each and every moment. The challenge of Good Friday is the same every year. The challenge of Good Friday is the same for all of us. I call you tonight to become people of the cross. People of the cross. People that really know that our faith is centered in the cross. In the cross where Jesus showed us how to live even unto death. And when he called out, "It is finished," remember, it's the call to you to be in ministry and to follow in his footsteps. May it be so for us. Thanks be to God. Amen.